All right, guys, so one of the first things you can do when you get out there and you're able to practice some is try to find somewhere that's as angled as possible, okay, on a hillside. And find somewhere to practice this where you can see down in the bottom and you can also see ridge lines, okay? All right? And so what you want to do is you want to go through in your mind, okay, if an animal was in the bottom, how would I set up my rest? If an animal was above me on the same side of the mountain, okay, you know, let's say it's just 100 yards below the ridge on this side, how would I set up, okay? What about if he was cross the canyon, right, and up on that ridge? What would I do if he was up, if he was down, right? So you want to go through all those scenarios, okay? You want to do it with the equipment that you're going to use during your hunt, okay? So like if you've got your bipod, go ahead and if you're going to hunt with that bipod, then use it in these scenarios, okay? And you can you can either do some live shooting at rocks if it's a safe place to do that and you're not bothering other folks, okay? Or you can just do this with an empty gun, okay? You can dry fire at rocks if you want to do that, or you can just set up your rests and then of course just acquire the targets, right? And you'll be accomplishing the same thing. If you do this, I mean, maybe for an equivalent of, you know, 30-40 minutes, maybe an hour and a half, okay? If you do it in several sessions, you will be amazed how much better you are prepared for field situations and how quickly you are going to tighten up that field grouping, okay? All right, so like for instance for me, on this bipod here, in a steep environment, I've done this enough to know that anything that's at the same level as me, okay, or below me, I'm gonna actually have to take a seated shot, okay? So I know that from prior practice, but you'll pick that up, okay? So for me, I know, like if there's a buck in the bottom here, that I'm gonna have to extend my bipod almost completely out, okay? And then in the angle environment, I'm going to be able to adjust my upper bipod, okay, while keeping the other. The other thing I know is that I'm gonna have to loosen my cant, okay? Just the way that this environment is, you're gonna need to cant your rifle typically, right, on a really steep hillside. And you'll pick these things up as you practice, okay? So here I know that that's how I'm gonna shoot game, okay, that's below me in this environment, all right, okay? And then, when I think about the shots that are up on ridges that aren't the side that I'm on, I know that it's very hard for me to do that actually off my bipod. It's almost impossible, okay? And I've realized that through trial and error, and a lot of people don't realize it because they don't practice this, but you can't get under your gun enough, okay, to get up high, okay? So generally what you're gonna end up doing, what I find you're gonna end up having to do, is you're gonna a lot of times have to use a tree, okay? So you wanna practice that. And these are just all scenarios I've worked out. The key thing of this whole deal is just the theory of that you need to work them out in your own mind, okay? I can't tell you how many guys I've guided and they work this out on a $10,000 hunt, okay? And at the time of the opportunity, all right? So a lot of times I'm gonna find that a natural rest, like a tree for very high angled shots, is going to be a lot better for me, all right? Okay? Shots at the same elevation as me, you know, if it's across the canyon or on the same ridge as me, generally I'm gonna use that same mode I just showed you, and that's tall bipod seated. If I'm shooting down where I'm actually on the ridge or I'm cresting a ridge, generally what I'll find is that the best for me is actually to have the bipod as low as possible. Okay? So a lot of times if I'm gonna crest a ridge, I'll actually have the bipod already set up like this, okay? And then as I go over the ridge, assuming this is the ridge and it's gonna drop off, I can shuffle to the top without skylining myself, and I can prone, okay? Depending on the topography I'm actually on, I can belly down prone, or I could just sit in here kind of partially prone, right? But a lot of times if it's flat at the top, you can belly down prone. Here we're on a pretty steep hillside, so I can't show you that. But those are all scenarios that you want to work out, okay, how you're going to approach them. One that's really tricky for guys is the same hillside above them. Generally, guys are going to try to shoot prone a lot of the time, and they're going to realize that if there's any brush at all, they're not going to be able to do it, okay? So what I find is that this is a good one to practice, because for me, the only way to do it is high seated, okay? The same way I showed you the others, like this. The problem with this is even this high seated position, okay, it can be fairly difficult to achieve, you know, actually finding the game animal. So through practice, what I've realized is generally in steep terrain, if the game I want to harvest is above me on the same hillside, I actually plan accordingly, in the sense that in my stock, I try to come at them at the same elevation if the wind will allow me, or a lot of times I find that I'm actually better crossing the canyon and getting on the other side, or getting in the bottom if there's enough topography there where I can get a good rest. But it's all the same concept, right? I'm not learning how to actually get a rest for that type of opportunity. What I'm learning is that I can't probably get a good rest if the game animal is there above me, particularly if I have a certain type of vegetation in front of me. So it's the same deal. It's still tightening up my field groups, in the sense that I'm not taking shots that are going to widen that field group, okay? And back to the original theory of this, the whole concept of practicing is not to tighten up your range groups, okay? Not to tighten up your 1 inch MOA, or excuse me, your 1 MOA range group. It's to tighten up your field groups from 5 MOA down to, you know, 1.5, 2 MOA, okay? And so that'll help you. You'll know that you can't, it's just hard to get a shot that way. And I run into that a lot with guys, right? You know, your guiding guys, it can be the most frustrating thing for guys. You get in a situation, a lot of times I'll ask guys, are you comfortable with that angled shot? Yeah, I can do it. They start trying to get it, and maybe it's not this shot, maybe it's the side hill shot or whatever. And that's when they realize that with what they've been preparing with, you know, and how they've been preparing their, you know, in terms of marksmanship for the hunt, they're not prepared to take that shot, okay? It's really painful when that happens when you're within distance of an animal, okay? So get that all the way through some practice. And I'll do the same thing. Some hunts I'm not the biggest fan of a bipod. So a lot of hunts I'll do the same thing. I'll practice with the pack I'm taking. This isn't the greatest example because this pack is just my little camera pack. But, you know, I'll carry my backpack or whatever that I'm taking on a backpack hunt, and I'll do my rest off of that. You'll find that in that scenario, backpacks work great when you're cresting a ridge, right? Basically in like a elevated prone position. They can work great on down angled shots, and they can work great on long distance upward shots, but you generally can't use them to get a high angle. They're worthless on the same ridge upward shots. And in tight canyons where you're shooting up, again, they're pretty much worthless. You can stick them behind your back sometimes, you know, it's kind of like to prop you up so you don't slide down the hill. But they're generally not real handy in those scenarios. But in big open mountain country, you know, sometimes in sheep country, way above alpine in the rocks and stuff, they can be pretty handy, okay, and we use them a lot, all right? A lot of times you're gonna have flat to downward shots, and packs are great for that, okay? All right, and then the other thing is, just like I showed you earlier, use trees, use rocks, use all that stuff that you might have to use in the field. All right, so the next two concepts, guys, you are gonna actually have to practice by shooting your rifle in a high angle environment. And there are two things that are very forgiving in the flat range type of scenario, and they're very unforgiving in the mountain hunting field scenario, okay? And that's eye relief and parallax, all right? So eye relief is really, it's tricky because almost everybody I know, they generally don't think about it a lot if they haven't done a lot of mountain hunting, but every mountain guide I know knows how common it is for guys to scope themselves on mountain hunts. And what it is you're in positions that you don't get to practice in the range scenario, okay? So if you're in a really angled position, okay, and you're scrunched up, you're not as focused on your eye relief. And what happens is you have different angles here too, right? You could be in a tight enough situation where you're trying to, it's high enough up, okay? Or it's tight enough down, and you've got to watch brush or rocks or whatever, okay? And what happens is the angle of your eye versus the scope, and then also how well you're pocketing the rifle and controlling it, those variables change drastically. And you can scope yourself, and that's obviously bad because any follow-up shot is pretty much an impossibility, right? It can seriously hurt you too, and it's miserable to do that to yourself. But just keep that in mind. You need to practice, and you need to be very cognizant of eye relief, okay? Shittier, cheaper scopes, it's going to be harder, okay? They're more prone to do it to you because of the optic. But even high quality optics, you need to practice. And before you even start shooting, just practice, move your head in and out so you know where the proper eye relief is. When you can start to see the wall of your scope, okay, you'll know where the proper spot is, and you need to be very cognizant of that in the mountain environment. So practice it, and then shoot a bunch so you practice it too. So after the recoil, you can follow through, find whatever you're shooting at, and then just know that, okay, I got to get back to that eye relief. The second one is parallax, all right? A lot of guys that shoot in a flat environment, or they shoot from a box blind or something whenever they're hunting, they never worry about parallax because they stick to a fundamental. The fundamental they stick to is they always keep their face position the same, all right? And that's great in a flat environment, box blind environment. It's tough to do in the mountains, guys, okay? It just is, all right? So a lot of times in the mountains, guys haven't practiced it a lot, and they depend on the fact that their cheek weld is going to be exactly how it always is, okay? And this is kind of related to why they get scoped a lot too. What they find out is that they're not able to keep that for whatever reason due to the angled environment. And what happens is they've never worried about having their parallax set correctly, okay? So what they're not realizing is now their eye's off and at an angle, their parallax is off, and actually their point of aim could be 5-6 inches different, okay, than if they were set right where their normal position is, right? But you can set your parallax so you don't have to worry about that, okay? But if that's something new to you, in the mountain environment, don't kid yourself that you can always have a perfect position with your body. It's just not the case, okay? It can be, it can be a quick shot, it can be a struggle in insane terrain or whatever, and you're not gonna be able to get that exact position. You're dealing with several different angles. So make sure you know how to set your parallax, okay? And you guys can look at YouTube videos where they show you what parallax is. But basically, if the crosshairs and your focal plane are not on the same, what'll happen is if your gun's steady, like it's sitting there, you're not touching it, and you just move your head around the eyepiece, right, as you look in there, if the point of aim changes, those crosshairs are moving without you touching the gun, that means your parallax is not set correctly, right? And it won't hurt you if you always always have the cheek weld, your point of view through the optic is always the exact same, okay? It won't hurt you. But if it's not set up correctly, and you're in a mountain environment and you don't have that the exact angle that you sighted your rifle in at and how you've practiced, you're gonna have issues, okay? So keep that in mind. So guys, I hope that's some stuff for you to work on, and just, you can go out there, get a target, get an MOA target or a 1 inch by 1 inch square target. And really what you should do is first, before you even do any of the practice ideas that I suggested, go out in an angle environment, staple up one of those targets and see how you group. You're probably gonna group between 3.5 MOA and 8 MOA, right? And it's gonna be horrendous from your perspective if you've been in a range shooting, you're always hitting, sub MOA type of accuracy. But that's what you're gonna end up with. Once you practice, okay, get your rests, understand parallax, know how you're gonna do everything, feel comfortable, focus on eye relief, get comfortable with that environment, you're gonna take that 3.5 to 8 MOA field accuracy, and you're gonna probably get it down to like 2.5 to 2 MOA. And if you're at 2.5, 2 MOA, okay, and you got a decent understanding of the wind, you're gonna be more than proficient and very accurate in almost all those big game mountain hunting scenarios that are 450 yards and below. All right, guys, so I hope that helps. Good luck out there.